All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Mic'd in New Haven podcast. We're well over 100 shows now, closing in on episode 120. I believe this is going to be episode 117. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, it was a really interesting chat with retired NYPD Deputy Chief John Cutter. John was originally with the New York City Housing Police, which merged with the NYPD in 1995, and then he went over after a while and started running the intelligence division, where after 9/11, the matters went from just strictly criminal matters to counterterrorism. So he discussed that at length and what the mission was and still is for the Intelligence Bureau to this day. So if you want to check that out, it was a really good chat. And I thank Chief Cutter for coming on. Now, I always like to say that this show is the Swiss Army knife of podcasts because it's not relegated to one thing or the other. And you see that. Last episode was Chief Cutter. And so we go from the squad room to the newsroom. With my next guest, we spent over 30 years in broadcast media, a native originally of Canada, Winnipeg to be exact. She later came to the States where her dogged yet eloquent style of reporting has taken her from Dallas to MSNBC, Court TV, CNN/HLN, and currently News Nation, where you can catch her weeknight program Banfield, which airs at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And that, of course, Ashleigh Banfield, who joins me now on the Mic'd in New Haven podcast. Ashleigh, so cool to have you. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, Michael, it's nice to see you. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. So as I mentioned, originally born and raised, if I'm not mistaken, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada, home of one of my favorite wrestlers ever, Chris Jericho, and of course, the Winnipeg Jets. So tell me about growing up in Winnipeg.
Well, first and foremost, I finally had a chance to actually interview Chris Jericho, and it was really cool because after the interview, we actually stayed online talking about all the places we grew up going to and how we never crossed paths because I'm older than he is. But it was a pretty cool moment to be able to chit chat with Jericho about our old haunts.
Y2J, baby. Y2J. Love that guy. Yep. So, tell me about, he is. Tell me about just what it's like growing up in Winnipeg. It's not Edmonton or Calgary, but people sleep on it. I feel like it's a very underrated town.
So it is, and most people don't even know where it is or what it is. The Winnipeg Jets certainly helps put it on the map because they're awesome. In an upper middle class community, and Bobby Hull was my neighbor at one point, who is a famous left wing for the Winnipeg Jets, the Hartford Whalers, just an icon of all time. I had a really good upbringing. There's 4 kids in my family. We had a pretty, tight, communicative nuclear family. It was really, really cold. I didn't think that it was weird. You have to leave Winnipeg to understand how weird it is, how we live. But I liken it, honestly, Michael, to living in Dallas. Because in the summer months in Dallas, you run from car to building, from air conditioned spot to air conditioned spot. You don't spend a whole lot of time outside. And that's sort of what we do in the 40 below zero winters in Winnipeg. It's just that you can dress for the cold. You can't dress for the heat, I always say.
Because, now, and you're based in Connecticut, as am I, a lifelong New Haven resident. Connecticut winters, I thought those were bad. I mean, that's nothing compared to this. This has to be a walk in the park for you.
This is a cakewalk. I wear t-shirts until after Christmas. Yeah. I do have to say, though, Michael, I'm probably more like you now than I am like my old self then, because I emigrated to the U.S. as a Canadian citizen via Dallas, Texas, which could not be more of a, pardon the pun, polar opposite. And so I acclimatized, right? And all of a sudden I started to think that, if it was slightly above freezing, I was, oh Lord, get the coats out. Whereas in Winnipeg, slightly above freezing would be like time to swim,
So where did the interest start in broadcast media for you? Was it a moment, in your early years? Was it a moment during your college years? Take me through that light bulb going off over your head.
Sure. I actually think I'm one of the luckiest people in the business. I say that because I don't know if anyone else has this same story, but I remember the moment where I had my epiphany. I remember where I was sitting when I decided this is the life for me. I was in Mrs. Sharp's 9th grade British history class, 3rd row from the left, front seat. And she was, honest to God, I can see the wooden desk with the little carvings in it. And I remember thinking somebody had to write all this stuff down. First of all, I didn't find British history super fascinating. I loved American history. As a Canadian, I loved American history. The Civil War to me was everything. And I remember thinking someone has to write all this stuff down. Someone had to see it first. And now we are dependent on him because it was a him, definitely. And I thought that could be me. I could do this. I could be the one that's telling everybody what's what, you know? And then from there, it kind of blossomed into foreign correspondence, because at that time, Beirut was on fire and the Marines had been killed, and the news was so electrifying. I remember seeing these foreign correspondents and they just looked so exotic and fascinating to me. I spoke 2 languages. I thought, okay, well, there's a start. I'm a performer just by nature. I mean, I was in every single play, you know, that didn't matter what part, I was always on the stage. Even as a little kid, I was performing for the family, you know. So I knew that I had what it took to live outside myself. I knew I was a good communicator. I knew I loved current events. I loved the idea of being first there, learning what the business was, and then being able to impart it on others. And so that lovely cocktail formed in 9th grade, and it just kind of never went away.
Ashleigh Banfield is our guest here in the Mike and Nuhaven podcast. We're certainly happy to have her. And so you broke in '88 between 2 different stops, CJBN TV and also CKY TV. And we'll dive deeper into your time at Edmonton and Calgary. But when you are doing anything new, it doesn't matter what the job is. For example, the bulk of this show is a lot of NYPD, FDNY interviews. So I always tell them, when you're starting out in the precinct, in the firehouse, what do? You observe the senior man, the senior officer. And so for you coming into the news station, you want to be as observant as possible, because you want to pick up lessons in not only what you should do, but even probably what you shouldn't do as well. So for you, that early experience, what lessons would you say were some of the more important ones that you picked up, either directly or indirectly?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And if I could live myself again, I would shut the hell up. I think that's number one, is listen. Listen. And when you're done listening, listen a little longer. 2 reasons. We're in the business of learning and then imparting. So the first part has to happen, right? And if you screw that up or you cut it off, you're not going to do the second part right. Number 2, you don't know everything. Even this day, 33 years into the business, there's just so much I don't know. And the more you recognize that you really don't know a lot, the more you will take in an honest way and impart in a better way. Number 3, like, people don't like it if you are a young kid and you try to tell people what's what. It's annoying. And when you're off-putting, you get less. You get less in the story. You get less from your coworkers. You get less from your surroundings. So there are a billion reasons why one should really shut up. And then I'm also going to add one more. I think the best parts of an interview happen when the pause happens. People naturally feel awkward if there's a big empty pause, and then they feel compelled to fill it. And I learned that from Howard Stern. He's the best at this. I think there's 2 people in this world who I think are the best interviewers in the world, and it's Howard Stern and a guy in Canada named Michael Enright, who used to do a radio show called As It Happens. And I listened to As It Happens every night. And I just felt that his interview was so incredibly natural, and he always let people fill the voids.
I think that's one of the things that I try to do, because naturally you always go and, even with 100 shows in, I'm 21, I'm starting out, I'm still trying to learn as I go. You wonder, am I saying the right thing? Am I asking the right question? But sometimes it's not just that. It's sometimes the person's so deep in thought into whatever it is that you asked them about, they're trying to transition to the next thing. So I think the best advice that I've gotten and that I've observed, in New York, we had a guy named Mike Francesa on sports radio, and I loved listening to him. But the thing that he used to kill me with was it was almost as if he was interviewing himself, because he would just talk over the guest all the time, to where I guess the best advice is really simple, and it's 3 words. And I'm sure you can concur with this. Let it breathe.
Yes. And it's so, I love the fact that you have a very natural conversational style. Perfect. It's perfect for a journalist, because putting the interviewee at ease, everything comes out without the interviewee expecting that they were going to say it. Again, it's a Howard Stern thing. Such a natural conversationalist, not an interviewer, a conversationalist. So people say things they probably hadn't planned to say. Sometimes regret afterwards. But filling the void is a really tricky wicket. As I don't have to explain to you, this is what you've been doing for 117 shows. You want to allow the person to finish what they say and not feel as though they should feel awkward for what they just said. But you also want to give them just enough time to button it up with something else or to fill that void out of awkwardness to give you that extra little nugget. But there's like a split second of you being wrong in letting it go too long. So it's a really hard navigation. And I'm here to tell you, you said you're 21.
Mm-hmm.
That's shocking. You don't 21. I'm 53, turning 54, and I am still trying to navigate that. And then add the electronics to it, the delay and the Zoom, and that just makes it so much more awkward and frustrating.
Thank you for that compliment. I think I've peaked now. Ashleigh Banfield called me a great conversationalist, so we can end the interview now. No, I'm just kidding. But, getting to your time in Edmonton and Calgary, okay, now these are bigger provinces. I don't want to say towns. The proper term is provinces. There we go. So,
No, you're right. You were right. No, Edmonton and Calgary are two cities in the province of Alberta, and Winnipeg is a city in the province of Manitoba. And they're all kind of vying for around the same size now. But back when I was there, Winnipeg was definitely the smaller of the three.
And Edmonton, of course, it's notable, the Oilers, the dynasty of the 80s with Gretzky and Messier, who I'm a Rangers fan, so I love Mark Messier as much as you guys do.
Well, and by the way, we used to say the Rangers were the Oilers. Basically, they all migrated in one big old chunk, except for
the 94 Stanley Cup team, like 7 guys from that team were Oilers. Buka Boom, McTavish, Glenn Anderson, Tikkanen. Yep, love those guys.
You're talking my language. I love you.
I often joke.
I haven't heard Tikkanen's name for so long.
I often joke. My friends jokingly refer to me as an Oreo because I'm like the only Dominican hockey fan I'm convinced in existence, to where I'll buy all the hockey video games. And Mike, my friends will tell me, Mike, we only get these games just so we could fight. You're the only one that's actually like building teams and playing franchise mode. So believe me, it's my language.
I love it. Hilarious. Well, you must have loved my Bobby Hall reference then.
Yes, Bobby Hall, love him. He's in NHL, the video game, as one of the legends that you can.
And by the way, you know what, Michael? I brushed over that pretty quick, but since Bobby Hall was my neighbor, I was actually his babysitter as well. I know you love hockey. I'll go into it, but he gave me the schedule, the home game schedule, and said, put this on your fridge. And on every home game, plan to be here at, I think it was, 5. And then just, you don't have to watch the game, but watch the end of the game. And if we win, we'll be home in about 2 hours. And if we lose, we'll be home in 20 minutes. And that's what I did. It was a second. It wasn't Brett Hall. I'm Brett Hall's age. But after he split from his wife, he went down to Hartford. He came back to Winnipeg. He had a girlfriend with a 9-year-old, and so I was the babysitter of the 9-year-old.
Oh wow, that is a story in and of itself. I'll have to bring you back for another episode on that alone. So, working in Edmonton and Calgary, like I said, 2 much bigger areas to work in. We often don't understand the demographics of a given place until we're in there. So, as far as the social climate in these 2 different places, as far as what the pressing issues were in relation to just common culture, crime, everything that has to be covered in a given city, tell me about what that was like for you, again, as an upstart at the time.
That's a really good question. I love that you're so thorough in digging into issues of your past that might have informed your future. I think it's a really great tack that you're taking as an interviewer. So pardon the, the praise along the way, but I think you deserve it. Not many people, right? People just usually hit the surface questions, and you're not. And so because of that, you're going to get something out of me that I hadn't really thought of before. First of all, Edmonton, the prairies are all pretty white, and sure, there's a Native American Indian. I call Native American Indian, but it's actually Indigenous people in Canada. There's that contingent, very small part of the population, but certainly significant part of Canadian cultural history. Never made its way into the news that much, but did slightly, probably a lot more in the last 25 years since I've been gone, with a lot of scandal and sort of tragic crime and victimization of the people as a whole. That should have informed me more, because there should have been a lot more coverage of it, but back in the 80s, there wasn't. I also think that as a 21-year-old, I was probably just figuring out broadcasting more than I was in depth figuring out culture. I think I was experiencing culture without absorbing it to be a better journalist. I think it was too early in the day to absorb it. Later, as I went to Calgary, something did happen to me that I absorbed. There was this is before you were born, but there was a story about the RCMP, and you've probably seen them. They're Mounties, right? They got the red, they've got the Stetsons. It's a really famous, traditional, iconic look for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. And there was a Sikh Indian man, who wanted to, he was graduating in the academy, but he wanted to wear his turban instead of the famous Stetson. And oh my God, the polarization on that story just boom. I mean, it was massive. And I remember as a, 21, 22, 23, I'm trying to guess now how old I was at that point in Calgary. I remember thinking, what's the problem here? Like, okay, they put two pictures beside each other. One was of an RCMP guy in his Stetson, and one was of this man. I wish I could remember his name now, but in his turban with the emblem, it was like a pin, a large pin with the emblem of the RCMP right in the center of the turban. I thought it actually looked really cool. It looked really awesome. And I'd always grown up knowing that Canada was different than the US because we're the mosaic and America's the melting pot. So I kind of thought, well, doesn't that fit what we say we are? Aren't we the mosaic? Like, shouldn't we be doing this? Because why should everybody homogenize? Why shouldn't we respect a religion? Why shouldn't we figure out a freaking way? But it really did, it really was the first story that I covered that has helped inform me as to what's happening here 25 years later, But it was a fascinating way to see divergencies in opinion over icons.
And I feel like that segues perfectly into what I wanted to ask you about as far as world fairs, because technically that is a world affair because it's a culture clash or a culture shock, if you will. And that is two summits, one in 1991 and one in 1993. Now we're coming off the Cold War at that time, which had a lot of people on edge to say throughout the 1980s. And
by
the
way,
first summit
91. We're still in the Cold War when I was in Russia in 91. Holy, and it wasn't Russia, it was USSR. So yeah, 91, it was just months before the Cold War actually ended that I was there.
Soviet Union was still, well, it was on its last legs, but it was still in effect. And that is Bush 41, the late George Herbert Walker Bush, with Mikhail Gorbachev, who I first learned about, I'm embarrassed to say, through the Sting song, Russians, simply titled Russians. That's the first time I ever heard his name. So that summit, given the implications in the world at the time, and given the portrayal of Russia as this grand enemy for what had happened previously, being there as a 20-something, take me through walking around and observing the Russian culture. And then, of course, for lack of a better way to ask it, being a witness to history.
Yeah, honestly, this was a huge part of my my sort of young journalistic genesis. I was actually backpacking around the world for a year at that point. The whole of 1991, I had a backpack on, and I was progressing my way kind of westward from Southeast Asia. Not the Eurail Pass where you can hit a Starbucks on the way. I was in the jungle, and I was in the mountains, and I was in central China and Mongolia, and all of the countries sort of in Southeast Asia, northward from Australia up through Indonesia. Spent 2 months in Indonesia, had to learn the language, really aggressive and unique adventure backpack travel. And part of that took me from Beijing on the Trans-Siberian Railway to Moscow. And you're now coming into the USSR, extraordinarily strict guidelines. You can have 6 days on this weird little paper visa, and then out you go. But there were all sorts of tricks of the travel trade where if you go to certain offices, you can get stamped extensions, and you can actually try your best to get, a little more time in Soviet Union. So this is what I did. And I went to Leningrad, I went to Lvov, I went to Ukraine, I went to spend time in Moscow, and of course did this Trans-Siberian trip across Lake Baikal, the north, Siberia, which is just only the thing of novels, right? And so in Moscow, lo and behold, the summit was happening right as I was there. So I took crayons and a piece of paper. I found it in the apartment that we were, illegally renting for $6 a week.
Allegedly.
Yeah. I took crayons and a piece of paper, and I faked a credential to get into the summit, and it worked. Do not ask how it worked, but it worked. I saw the credentials, and I took the crayons, and I got into the summit, and I immediately went shopping to each of the big networks in the United States. I went to CBS, I went to NBC, I went to ABC, and ABC said, "Yeah, we'll take a free hand, sure." And I ended up doing like just basically running for them, running anything they needed. And at one point ran up to the rooftop where Peter Jennings was broadcasting and was like handing him notes of breaking news up to his chest. So I felt like I was actually like a really big part of the broadcast that night. And that was an awesome thing. At the time, I was experiencing the Soviet Union it was the most bleak, depressed, just uncomfortable existence to date for me, because it got a lot worse later. But it just felt so sad that there was just no living in Moscow. In Leningrad, there was a little more living because there was beauty. There was the Hermitage Museum. There were all these lovely things. In Leningrad's like Venice of Russia, right? It's just gorgeous. So that was a little bit more beautiful, but still hard to get a bite, hard to find food. Restaurants didn't exist. I mean, really weird. Ukraine, long lost family members of my boyfriend, we stayed with them on their collective farm, and that was an experience, like vodka shots for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, bizarro. I really learned about the alcoholism culture there. And so I took and had to leave eventually, right? Because that visa stamping process eventually ran out, and I ran into a little trouble and got detained for a while, but left through the Hungarian border, and 6 days later, the revolution. So I squeezed the last of Soviet Union out in that journey and learned about the depressive sadness of that existence. And then watched with interest as, so many unique changes happened to that country. And, wealth was introduced, but in a bifurcated way. And so I've had a certain fascination ever since, because I lived the old country.
We talked earlier about observance, and Edward Snowden mentioned this in an interview that he did with Joe Rogan a while ago, where he talked about being over there currently in asylum. When you see these stories on the news, you think that everyone over there is an adversary, whereas the average citizen does not have that much not in common with you. The culture is different, the language is different, but the person at heart, for the most part, is the same. So Can you recall any notable interactions just with the citizens, even if it wasn't passing, that told you, in a sense, okay, this person is not my enemy?
Yeah, I'll tell you the most significant one. And it's not from Soviet Union, although there were loads of people there. I felt completely like we were all equals. I never felt for a moment that I was the great Satan. Mind you, I was Canadian. I never felt that, when I was there with the people. They were fascinated with us. They so wanted our denim, like our jeans, We left everything we had, by the way. Everything in our backpacks we left for, these family members, because what to us was nothing was everything to them. The incident that you're getting at happened actually in Iran, in Tehran. And every year, the Iranians mark an anniversary where they gather in the center of Tehran by the thousands, and they chant, "Death to America, death to America, death to America." And I laugh only because there's more. They have signs that say, Marbar America, and they chant Marbar America, Marbar America, and it's death to America, death to America. And there's like, presidents hanging effigy and all that, right? So there I am with NBC and my, little crew of 4 of us. We're up on a, bleacher kind of setup, shooting this huge sea of humanity, charging, that they wanted us dead. And I said, I think we should go down among them. And my crew was like, yeah, that would be awesome. And so we did. We went marching all, through the crowd, and we were saying, yeah, hi, we're with NBC United States. So like, oh, America, welcome.
That's simple. That's simple. And that's
simple, Michael. And doesn't that tell you something? There was a big difference, they used to say, between your government and your people. They felt very different. I never felt threatened in circumstances like that. I felt threatened in other circumstances, but not in circumstances like that. I always found the people of these enemies of America to be perfectly delightful, unless they were, holding guns and holding me in rooms without communication for 7 to 10 hours. And God, someone in Iraq, one of Saddam Hussein's deputy ministers insisted that we go for lunch with him to discuss what we wanted to achieve on this visit to Iraq right before we invaded. And he had this like slithering snake-like feel and look to him as he looked across this terrible stinking fish that was in the center of the table that had come out of the Tigris and really smelled like sewage. And I remember thinking, oh God, we have to eat this. I don't know if we're going to survive it. And then he said, you will report appropriately, right? Or you will be our guests permanently. And I remember just thinking like, God, that is bad. Like this, we have gotten into a pickle here. And then we had to eat that fish, and then he stuck us with the bill.
Oh my God. At that point, if that happens to me, I am getting on the next plane out of there. Well, it's been nice meeting you, sir, but I have to get back,
right? I do remember thinking it was almost like a cartoon, like this slithering tongue that was saying these awful things. I remember almost feeling like it was animated, what was happening across the table from me. Like, oh my God, he's really serious and he looks like a cartoon. Anyway.
But I believe bluntness might be a part of the culture, though, as we'll dive deeper into later, because I remember John Miller was a guest for my 100th episode. The NYPD deputy commissioner, who was a correspondent formerly with NBC and ABC. And as you remember, he conducted an infamous interview with bin Laden in 98. And he was saying prior to that, his number two at the time, Zawahiri, who was later killed in November 2001 airstrike, said, to Miller, it's like, I have 16 questions. And here he says, he'll answer every one of them, but we're not going to translate what he says. And he's like, well, wait a minute. How am I supposed to ask a follow-up question? You don't have to worry about that. There's not going to be any follow-up questions. So, that culture, and I'm not bashing it. Every culture is different. And until you take the time to learn about it.
I don't think it would have mattered. You could ask as many follow-ups as you want. They answer what they want to answer. And I don't think we're that different. I'm not going to lie. I watch cable news all the time and I see our senators, our leaders, and you ask them a pressing question when you just wait for that, like, oh, he's got you in a tight spot and they wiggle out of it. Then they try again and they wiggle out of it. So it's really no different. And
word salad.
Hey, listen, it's word salad. And I know it's really easy for Americans to look over, yonder and say, ugh, how you behave. But if you really were introspective on us, we do a lot of the same thing.
Yeah. I think it's not even relegated to a specific culture, I think it's just human nature in some aspects, or many aspects.
Of course. And if you can look at everyone through human nature, instead of just this like good guy, bad guy, silo, we'd all be in a way better place, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Before I get to your Dallas years, I have to imagine, given how intense 91 was, when Clinton and Yeltsin met in 93, that had to be a piece of cake.
Yeah, that was in Vancouver, Canada. So that's my backyard. And I was a fixer at that point, once again for ABC. And I worked again for a little bit for Jennings. Again, I'm the totem pole. I'm the grass around, like way off the totem pole. I was so I was running and getting coffee and, but just wanted to be surrounded in that. And that was an exciting, it was pretty easy. And I remember that was the summit where I met Tom Friedman for the first time, the author of From Beirut to Jerusalem, which I was a huge fan. I was gobsmacked when I met him and just thought, I can't believe I've just met Tom Friedman. I think he was so delighted to have a young person freak out about his recent book. And then we've had a relationship ever since. He ended up over in Pakistan right after 9/11, and I downloaded him on everything that had been happening in the last month that I'd been there. So it was actually really something else to be able to talk to Tom Friedman about everything I'd been experiencing and get him up to speed on where things stood, at least from my perspective in Pakistan.
Ashleigh Banfield's our guest here on the Emigrating podcast, and I'm having a lot of fun talking with her so far. It's been a great conversation. So you mentioned earlier coming into Dallas, and of course, Dallas, it's a city that I think is, again, also, we talked about Winnipeg being underrated. The same can be said for Dallas. Dallas and Houston are really two terrific cities, because when you think about media capitals in the United States, okay, there is New York, there is Los Angeles, there is Chicago, but there is also Texas, and you can't ignore those two specific markets. And we're talking about two cities that are among the top 10, at least top 15, in terms of how large they are and the impact on the market. So going there, first, take me through how long it took you to adjust. Did you battle homesickness? And two, of course, climate differences, as we discussed earlier,
Yeah.
dealing with that, and of course, dealing with a difference in how people viewed things. There's a different worldview than there from Canada than there certainly is in America, and especially in the more westernized parts of this country.
There were really, really big changes that I went through, Michael, going from Calgary to Dallas. And those two towns aren't so different because they're kind of Western, and there's a lot of ranching and cowboys in Calgary. And obviously that's what we kind of think of it as Dallas up north. But so that kind of a culture, that was a breeze. I was already living it. I did struggle with food products, didn't know what milk to buy, butter to buy, couldn't find all the products that I was used to. My favorite candy bars weren't there, just little things like that, which I wasn't expecting. I kind of thought it would just, the cross-border would just be homogenous. It wasn't. That's simple stuff. The real hard stuff was the racism. I had never heard the N-word used in real life. I heard it in movies, but I heard it in real life the day I got there. And I just remember thinking like, I am not in Kansas anymore. Wow, it was really eye-opening. And I don't know why I was such a neophyte with regard to that, but maybe it's because up here in the Northeast, I just don't hear it like it's not the same, right? There's not that cultural, I don't know.
Similarity?
Yeah, I don't want to say similarity. I want to say like, there seems to be a looseness that's different than up here. I don't hear that word here, but I heard it right away. Granted, it's 25 years ago. So I want to be careful about how, I don't want to indict, people. I met some of the most remarkable people in the world in Dallas, Texas. And to this day, they remain very good friends. I just found that came out right away and I was shocked. And then, I came to learn about this like really divided city. I mean, literally north and south of downtown. It's black on the south and it's white on the north. And the Dallas Independent School District had all sorts of like ugliness that recorded tapes with people saying, who cares about those little ends on the other side of the north-south line. And this is how I was baptized in Texas. And I had to accommodate for whether this was America, like, is this ubiquitous, or is this unique to this moment? Or is this unique to this one story? Or is this unique to Dallas or Texas as a whole? So I had a lot of processing to do all at the same time as learning new systems, like new systems of policing and courts were all different, terminology, all different, government, all different. We don't have ministers, we had secretaries. And so there was a lot for me to take in, and culturally a lot to sort of figure out all at the same time. But it was, wow, baptism by fire.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that without diving too deep into it, because, for example, that word, listen, New Haven, growing up here, a lot of my classmates were from, for lack of a better way to word it, from the hood. So I've heard that word in a much different context to where, do I use it? Not really. No, it's not part of my lexicon. But when somebody greets me, that's just good morning. What's up, my, and then that word.
But isn't it a term of endearment? Like, isn't it meant loving?
Yeah,
there's
surprisingly.
A difference, right? And I think the same word. So you're an underclass as a Black man, and I'm an underclass as a woman, right? So there's a similar-ish kind of word, and it's the B word. And if I say to my girlfriend, "B, what you doing?" It's sweet. It's meant in a deliciously lovely way. It's not meant to say you are hideously a female dog and need to be derided. So I've always struggled with whether that N word or the B word should disappear. And I have competing thoughts all the time, and I can't lie. I sometimes think the N word should be co-opted by Black people to like seize it and change it. Etymology changes all the time. There are words that we don't use anymore that we have completely changed the meaning of. And I think that's one of the words that should completely change, right? It should become a term of endearment. It should mean something beautiful instead of something murderously horrid. But it's not for me to do it. It's for Black people to decide how they want it to change, because they were victimized by it. So they should call the shot.
It reminds me of a scene. Rush Hour 1, 2, and 3 are some of my favorite movies ever. I've watched them 800 times. I still laugh every single time. In Rush Hour 1, Jackie Chan's character, he's new to the culture. He's going into a bar in LA, and Chris Tucker's character says, "What up, my," he keeps walking. Jackie, oh, okay, what's up, Mike? And a bar fight ensues, and it's hilarious because he doesn't know. But then again, the intention was good. So it's a little interesting wrinkle that we tackled here. We are the Swiss Army knife of shows, as I said. We can go any direction. So,
but by the way, it seems simple, right? We're talking about simple because you and I live journalism, so we live detail and nuance and all that. But the vast majority of the public kind of lives bumper sticker. They're busy. They're working two jobs. Mom's working, dad's working. They're trying to get the dinner on the table. The kid's got an issue at school. They don't have a ton of time to chew on all of these news issues that you and I live for all of our waking hours. And so I give the Americans out there a pass for maybe not knowing every single piece of it. And I always feel bad when someone steps in it with no intention to do bad, and then they sort of get the death penalty for it. I wish we were a more accommodating culture. I just wish we would look into backstory and context more before we instantly determine what sentence is.
Absolutely, I agree. So that brings us to the year 2000. And you arrived to MSNBC in New York City. I should say you won an Emmy. Before I get to New York City, you won an Emmy for your reporting in Dallas. Now, recognition, listen, everybody wants it. And not in an unhealthy, egotistical sense, but it's nice to get that attaboy or attagirl. So seeing your name on that Emmy for the first time, at least stateside, take me through your emotions in that moment.
Everything you just said. I mean, I think it does stroke your ego, and it does give you the attaboy, and it does sort of feel good. At the same time, when you've done good work. If it doesn't get submitted or it gets passed over or whatever, when you've done good work and you hear it around you. It's different for anchors and on-air people as well, because we get it all the time, right? We get the good and the bad, but we get a lot of accolades, whereas producers don't, because they walk down the street and no one knows that they were part of that thing. The anchor, they know that they were part of that thing, and they say, oh, I love you on that show, or I saw you on that. Ooh, that was great. But what people don't realize is that no one will walk up to you on the street and say, oh, Ashleigh Banfield. Oh yeah, I watch you every morning. You're terrible. They won't do that. They will do it online. So this 33-year career of mine, the big shift sort of came in the middle, where all of a sudden it was like, what is all this negativity all of a sudden? I thought I was pretty good at this job. And then people will, anonymously feel very brave and tell you the things they would never tell you when you see them.
And we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. So going to MSNBC, now MSNBC now is a lot different than what MSNBC was in 2000. Their ratings are much bigger, and for reasons well documented. But in 2000, they were still trying to find their footing. I believe the highest rated show they had on that network was the simulcast of WFAN's Imus in the Morning. And Imus used to joke about that with Charles McCord, where he would say, how much does that say about MSNBC, kind of jokingly in his classic dry sense of humor. So going there, it is a network that is linked to a bigger network in NBC, and obviously 30 Rockefeller Plaza is an iconic place. Was that what moved you to want to go there, or were there other factors at play to pick MSNBC?
Oh, well, listen, I always wanted to progress out of local news and do network news, because again, my initial focus and goal was to be a foreign correspondent. And I knew that I was going to have to get into TV in some way. My degree is in politics and French. I had to learn broadcasting from doing the buttons in little old Keewatin, Kenora, Ontario. At the time, it's smaller than any college outfit that you've probably heard of or seen. But I still had that goal of network news and foreign correspondence. And so moving from Dallas to MSNBC was that entree into network news, which was, they were going to give me a 3-hour show. And I thought, holy Dinah, who gets that out of local news? But that was a no-brainer. It's funny, at the time that I took the job at NBC, NBC/MSNBC, Fox News was competing and trying to one-up them on the contract. So we went back and forth 3 times with Fox upping their offer, and then NBC upping their offer, and then Fox upping. Yeah, so it was, Roger Ailes used to, take the booth to me in the press, but he was competing against NBC to hire me. So he never said that part out loud. But anyway, I went to NBC with the opportunity of not only doing 3 hours of real estate on MSNBC, but the opportunity to do things on NBC as well. They said you'd be able to fill in on Weekend Today and Dateline and all sorts of stuff, which ended up happening. I ended up doing all those things.
There was a good nucleus of talent that has since ascended way up the ladder. Like Lester Holt was at MSNBC at the time. Brian Williams
We
was
did a
there
show
too.
together. Lester and I had a show together called Newsfront.
Exactly. I think in my curation of this outline, I believe I stumbled across that. That's interesting. And Lester's a guy I got to get on the show. I've been trying to, so hopefully I can.
Can I tell you something about Lester Holt? Oh, he's the nicest man alive.
I've heard that. And he's a bass player too.
He is. He is the nicest man alive. I mean, Wolf Blitzer is too, but Lester Holt is just fine right from the DNA on out. Just fine.
Yeah, it seems like he comes. Every story I've read about him, people have said, well, he's just a really down to earth guy. You would never know that if you didn't really know who he was or follow the news, you wouldn't know that he has the prominent position that he does.
You would know that he's super elite smart. Like you would, if you just met him and you didn't know about the news thing, you would assume he graduated from Harvard, probably was a Rhodes Scholar. He just comes that way without ever saying anything outwardly, like without ever trying to prove it. He's just really wise and he's smart and he's muted and he's contemplative and all of those things that is perfect for the role he's in.
So you mentioned wanting to go from local to national, and I talked earlier about the acclimation process. Now the antennas in the ears of a journalist on a national network are everywhere. It's not just the stories in the home base of New York City. It's what's going on, of course, in Texas. It's what's going on in Seattle or Los Angeles. And the year you joined was that very controversial Bush and Gore presidential election, which you talk about baptism by fire. So covering that, which didn't end until December 2000 concession speech by Vice President Gore, and seeing what was going on in Florida and seeing what the attitude was in Bush's home state of Texas. And of course, the Clintons had a residence in New York, upstate at the time, seeing what the attitude was in New York, where Hillary Clinton was running for Senate at the time. Take me through just, I guess, having to have those antennas everywhere and be plugged into everything.
Well, Bush Gore 2000 kind of started to put me on the map at MSNBC. And one of the things, well, you mentioned that I won the Emmy in Dallas, and one of the things I won the Emmy for was covering a case. So I'd started to get my feet wet in American law, and it's very different than Crown law that I had come from in Canada. But I'd started to really learn the ropes of criminal trials, and won the Emmy for just having to talk for 2 hours straight it was 1 or 2 hours, I can't remember, on a case with no guidance, no help, no guests, no anything. So I won the Emmy for that, and I think that may have wet my whistle slightly for covering law and crime and law and justice. And along came Bush Gore 2000, which was just a flurry of speed cases. Most people don't know how many cases actually were launched during the Bush Gore indecision 2000, but there were dozens upon dozens of cases, not just the Supreme Court case that we all know of. There were just challenge after challenge after challenge in Florida to the process itself. And so I would stay up till 5 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, meticulously taking notes on every single moment of what happened in all of the cases, so that when I went on the air the next day, nothing would faze me. I would know everything about every case and how they all intersected. And for that reason, I think I got recognized for that within the network, and then also like within the press, because they started saying like, who is this girl in the glasses? And boy, is her coverage ever good. And I was very, very proud of that coverage too, of Bush Gore 2000, because it was really the first time that I was so steeped in arcane law, not just criminal, not just a trial, not just that kind of thing, but this was really tricky stuff. Constitutional law, election law, state law versus federal law versus Supreme Court issues. And so that was a really good moment for me to figure out, hey, I actually dig this stuff. I like this stuff. And I could find an avenue here if this is the avenue that works. Turned out there were a lot more avenues coming with foreign correspondence and stuff, but that was the first little genesis of the super interest in law.
And in expressing that on the air and highlighting the points that maybe people didn't know about, there's a secondary motivation, and we all have it if we're doing something like what I'm doing with the show, and then what you're doing obviously throughout your careers. You never know who's watching. You never know who's listening. Like I mentioned my interview with John Miller earlier. He referenced prior interviews I'd done. I'm like, you know who I am? And that was.
I saw that moment. I saw that moment because I watched your John Miller interview. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Wow, I didn't know that. So, I mean, just that
and
sheer.
Gail King. I watched your Gail King too. You're really hauling in the big fish.
Thank you. Thank you. I try my best on this show. So, I mean, just with something like that, afterwards, did you have that moment? I mean, obviously not with the talent that you work with on the air, but the big time producers behind the scenes, the big time executives behind the scenes. Did you have somebody come up to you after such a good performance telling you, hey, that was a really, really good job? And then, that shock of, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I had the top executives coming up to me, and the president of NBC News, taking me for lunch to say, we need to build your presence. Let's talk about what you want in life and what you want. He even recommended, if I was interested in doing a Harvard MBA, that they would help to facilitate it and pay for it. And I look back on it now, and I think it may have been more of a ploy to dangle me out in front of some contract negotiations for other people at the network who were coming up. And, I'm not so sure if it was disingenuous or not, but no, I heard a lot of feedback from people. One time is a little bit different, but it's in the same vein, but it's a different era. One time I was a presenter at the Emmys at one point, and international Emmys, and Steven Spielberg came across the room and said, "Court TV, oh, what up with Betty Broderick?" He was just a huge super fan, and I'm like, "You were watching?" What? So it's a little different than the executives at NBC coming and telling you you're doing a good job. When you have Steven Spielberg super fanning you for an instant, it's like you've made it. Like you're done. Your bucket list is closed.
You checked off. Yeah. And so I do want to get to now something that really defined your career and really defines one's life, and that is your experiences, which were terrifying on the morning of 9/11. September 11th, 2001, the president was in Florida. The big story in New York City that time was the mayoral primary, because the Giuliani administration was coming to an end. So they were determining who was going to be the next mayor. And that's when at 8:46 a.m., as we all know, the world changed. And you were down there to witness all of that. And you had very, very close calls. Take me through that morning.
Yeah, so that was, certainly, I think, the moment of my life, not just my career, but of my life, because I almost lost my life. So you never forget that. So I witnessed, like most people, the first tower, which was a shock to everybody. But at the time, in the early reporting, we thought it was a biplane that had just accidentally flown into the tower. Nobody could really see the scope from the tower cams. It just looked like a small plane had hit, and they were saying a biplane might have hit the World Trade Center. But I knew it was going to be a big story because the World Trade Center had a fire. And I thought that's going to be a big story. The rescue of the people above the fire is going to be the big story today. And so I called the office, and instead of, getting on the shuttle to go over to Secaucus, New Jersey to anchor my show with Lester Holt for that night, I said, I think I should go down to the Trade Center and just report live there. Whether I report as a reporter for Msnbc all day and do the show live from there, whatever it is, that's what I should do. And then it was decided, yes, that's a great idea. So I jumped in the shower because I just come back from a run. I jumped in the shower quickly. And when I got out of the shower, as I was drying my hair, boom, the second one. So I was like moving even faster, right? And then the office called me back and said, no, come out to Secaucus and report. You're going to do your show from out here. Now that's got to be a big mistake. Like there's got to be a cross. But that's a dumb idea because it's an hour and a half commute. And once I'm gone, there's no coming back. So I tried to sort of argue with them about it, saying, this is a bad idea. And decided that I would start on the move as they were sorting this stuff out. And it's a good thing too, because as it turned out, everything shut down. I never would have made it out there anyway. And I certainly wouldn't have been able to do the coverage that I ended up doing. I tried to get down the subway closed down. I got into a cab. He took me to Houston. He wouldn't take me any further. And then it was just me running south, watching the burning tower, and then eventually the first one coming down. Now seeing, obviously, the only thing left was the second burning tower, and still running south against the flood of everybody running north. Don't ask me why. I certainly didn't think the second tower was going to come down. I don't think anybody was really thinking logically at this point. And when I got to within just, a couple of blocks the footprint, the second tower came down, and that's when I was at risk of losing my life and broke through a window, ran for cover, and rode out the storm, in a vestibule of a nearby building. But there are a lot of things you think of when these moments happen. Things do slow down. I remember looking straight up, craning my neck way back and looking at the building coming down and having that epiphany. Like, first of all, the first thing I thought was, oh, this is what it looked like when the first one came down for all the people who were already here. And the second thing I thought was, oh dear God, it's coming down right here. You know, run. I'm sure the whole thing took all of about 5 seconds, but I remember running and then just sort of getting hit with everything from behind and basically suffocating. And I took the shirt, I had a jersey shirt over time, jersey cardigan, ripped it off really quickly and strung it around my mouth just so that I could breathe through it. But after that, the traumatic stress held to the point where my voice, I couldn't say anything without a quiver, which was crazy. I kept, once I got into that safety of that vestibule, I kept dialing the Motorola flip phone that I had over and over to get back to the control room. I don't know how many times it took because the cell systems were just gone. But I got through, and I remember talking to Amika, producer, who answered the phone, and more than wanting to report, I remember screaming to her, don't drop this call, 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 because you're my only connection for someone to know if we're about to die, thinking that this building was coming down too. Like, I just thought they were all coming down, right? This was like catastrophic. And I thought that at any minute, Amika would be the last person to hear me alive. So I just remember the terror. I could hear it in my own throat, you know. But I got on the air and I told I told them what had happened via the Motorola's flip phone minutes after that had happened, and then ventured out into the moonscape once the darkness lifted. Found an NBC truck coming out of the mist of the debris. And I banged on the side of it and they stopped. And I said, I'm Ashleigh with Msnbc. Do you have a camera? And can you go live from right here? And he said, we can go live from right here. We don't have a camera. So then we started looking for someone with a camera. I found a Fox News reporter who I said, this is not competition anymore. This is the apocalypse. I think we should join forces. I have the truck, you have the camera. We should broadcast together to both of our networks. And he said, great idea. And then called his desk and they said no. And they went on their way, which I was so distressed about. I just thought that was an opportunity for really informative journalism that transcended competition, because he hadn't experienced what I'd experienced. He was coming in clean, no debris. And I thought, you don't know that this is the apocalypse. But and then I found a German tourist who had a handy cam. And the engineer with NBC said, I can get a cable into the handy cam, but you got to use your phone for the IFB and audio. So that's how we did our first live shot.
You mentioned, the tower taking about 5 seconds. I think they said it took 8 seconds. And I got a good pal of mine, Detective Dan McNally, retired from the bomb squad, who was in the customs house in front of the Tower 1, the old U.S. Customs house. And he said, I only had about 5 seconds to get out a quick prayer. And I just said, dear God, if you're going to take me fast. And 3 men were behind him. Sergeant Mike Curtin of Emergency Service, Officer John Delara of Emergency Service, and his partner, Claude Richards, the bomb squad. He made it out, but those 3 men behind him didn't.
Oh my God.
It was mere feet. And it's just stories like that, because I mentioned the NYPD FDNY interviews about that day. It's just, there were people that you saw on the street that day, either as civilians or first responders, that you never saw again. Another story that Kevin Barry told me was, I mentioned John Delara, and last note on it before I shift to the war on terror. The emergency service cops, as you've seen them in New York City, they have the big air packs and whatnot, the helmets, they're heavily equipped. They lock eyes at the corner, Detective Barry and Officer Delara, and they both go as if to say, we don't know what we're getting into. And that would be the last time Detective Barry would see John, who wasn't recovered until April the following spring. And so there's so much loss. Now, there's so much heartbreak and sorrow, but also there's the confusion as who did this and why and what's next. And that brings
natural
us,
questions, right?
Right. And that
I
brings
don't even think I thought of those. I don't think I even thought of those questions. I don't even remember when that crossed my mind, like who did this? I think my focus, going back 20 years now, if I had to really think about it, was probably how many How many people died? How do we find them? I think that was all I was thinking, like, oh my God, it's 9 o'clock in the morning. Everybody's at work. How many people? That has to be tens, at least 10,000 people, 5,000 per tower, right? I kept thinking that. And then I remember feeling so much better over the days, learning that there were so many people who did evacuate, and then getting angry again that the South Tower were told, no, don't worry, it's the North Tower only, come on back in, you don't have to. And then, the plane hit the second tower. So all those people who had the opportunity to leave and were told not to, and chose not to, didn't. So yeah, it was a lot. I think that was where I was really thinking. And then 9 days after 9/11 is when I got the assignment to go to Afghanistan. And clearly was thinking then, by that point, I was clearly thinking, like, yeah, who did this? And now what's my next story? My next move in this. It wasn't even a story. It was my next move in this new world. That was what it was. Our new,
which we're still
normal,
which we're still living in 20 years later. And so,
yeah,
at that point, everybody's a suspect. I'm just saying that, objectively looking back, because I wasn't old enough to remember this. I was only 1 year old. And I'm not trying to be facetious here,
it's
but
so bizarre. No, but it's so bizarre to think that, wow.
I was probably running around with my mom. Why haven't you fed me yet? But you know what I mean?
Right,
While,
right.
the whole world was changing. So there's the elements of Al Qaeda. There's the elements of the Taliban. I think people quickly figured out bin Laden was behind this. But what's interesting is that you interviewed Taliban prisoners, and also you interviewed Yasser Arafat. Now, to give context to Arafat, Arafat's status at this time was ambiguous. He did condemn the attacks. But years prior, in 1995, he was banned from the 50th anniversary of the United Nations Assembly because of his perceived involvement in a terror attack above a cruise ship that killed a New York City Jewish resident who terrorists executed above the boat. So nobody knew where the allegiances stood out in that region of the world. And you're in the thick of that. And at one point, you did cross paths with him and interview him. So to interview somebody who was such a controversial figure at the time, A, what kind of questions do we even craft for him? And B,
right.
How do you, as someone who just witnessed such horror, how do you check your bias at the door, however hard it may be to do at the time?
Oh, I had to do that the minute I arrived, because I'm not going to lie, Michael, every single person in Pakistan that I ever talked to, had the same kind of response to me, was like, oh gosh, yes, this is terrible, but, and they always followed it with a but. And I kept thinking, are you really butting me? Because I still have cuts and scrapes and bloody feet. You can see it on my sandals, right? Like my scabs haven't healed yet. What is the but? What are you giving me? Like I was really aggressively angry when people would tell me, well, this is so sad for you in America, what you've gone through, but. And their point was, you lost 2 buildings and 3,000 people. We've lost years and years, decades and centuries and millions of people to American foreign policy. That was their point to me. And I had to eat it and understand that. And, frankly, when you're in the world that you're covering, it's a little easier to understand the street. You should really check your bias at the door if you're reporting it from your comfy American chair and talking about the people over there. That's a very different, flaming arrow to throw. But I had this dichotomy of wisdom. I had been the victim of 9/11, and there were these people saying, well, too bad for you, but, and I had to learn to understand why they said what they said. Arafat, on the other hand, was slightly removed because it was probably about 4 months, 6 months, I think. I'm trying to remember, maybe only a couple months. It was somewhere between January and probably June of, following 9/11 that I interviewed Arafat. And it was in the midst of this, conflagration yet again in the Middle East, where it's a cyclical thing. It happens all the time. But Arafat was a central figure for decades as the leader of the Palestinian people. And there was some sense that he was losing control of them. He couldn't dictate to them how to behave if he was making deals with Americans. And that was what my interview with him was about. And he was under siege. His compound was being bombed, rubble all over the place. And I had to clamber up over rubble to get in there. And they lost their power and their medical, shipments. And Arafat was on needed medicine and water. And so that was a great interview because he was a huge figure. I mean, Arafat was a huge figure. You say the name Arafat and it was like, wow, you got Arafat? Whoa, that's nuts. And so that was a great interview because he fed me a ton of gibberish in Arabic, right? And then, you know, the translator would give me his, and I know he can speak perfect English. And then he switched into English when he started getting mad. And I started getting the sound I really needed. And he's like, I am Chairman Arafat. Don't tell me I don't have control of my people. I am the chairman, you know. So that was a great moment for me to be able to, like, not get under his skin, but get him to the point where I was questioning whether he really was the guy he used to be, you know. And so getting that was really awesome.
And that segues now into your Court TV years. You were a war correspondent for a while. And then you went over to Court TV and you had some troubles towards the end at NBC. No fault of your own, just, I guess, disagreements, we could say, and how you wanted to cover this versus what the network thought.
No, I mean, honestly, they had diminished my role there well before I had spoken publicly about the way the media was covering the war. I felt like it was very jingoistic. And if we all look back, I think I was spot on.
Yeah, I'd say.
Felt like I was committing some cardinal sin of suggesting for a moment that we could be introspective and critical of ourselves as Americans and or as journalists. But everybody was very, you know, patriotically banging the drum of being at war, and I was questioning that. So I am extraordinarily proud of what I did and what I said, and I will never for a moment regret that, even if it precipitated them treating me the way they did, which was abysmal. But they had already begun diminishing my role, and I could never figure out why. That it remained a mystery for a very long time, you know.
I'll hit on a few more things because I know you're a busy woman, so I do not want to keep you long. I'm loving this conversation, but I don't want to keep you more than I should. So while at Court TV, you covered the Casey Anthony trial, and you're a mom, you know, and you know there's often
I did Casey Anthony. Actually, I did. It was right after Court, right at the end of Court TV, and I moved over to ABC, and I covered Casey Anthony for Good Morning America on ABC.
Oh, Good Morning America. My apologies there. So, I mean, like I said, you're a mom, and there's the old adage, your mother would never hurt her baby. But here's an instance where a woman is accused of doing just that. I talked about checking your bias at the door, but you're a human being. And like I said, you have that emotion as a mother. How does a reporter in your position channel that emotion in a healthy way so as to cover the story in the way that it should be covered? Because at the end of the day, we're talking about a baby that never had a chance to grow up in life. Yeah,
baby the same age as mine. Actually, my eldest was right around the same age, just within a few months of Kaylee. So it's different when you're a reporter, and I was working as a correspondent for Good Morning America. So that's just, you know, pretty dry, just the facts. And I had this great legal, you know, background, so I was able to really do a good job of the case, covering the case itself. And you know, I think I was able to talk to the Anthonys a lot differently than perhaps someone else who wasn't a mom of a child the same age. And they felt differently towards me, right? Because I could completely empathize. That certainly had an effect. But it's also very different in the show I'm doing now. I mean, the show I'm doing now isn't so much a reporting show as it is an analytical show. So some of the bias can creep in. You can't libel people. You can't accuse people of crimes they haven't committed on the air. All the rules of journalism apply there. But you can be angry at, say, Brian Laundrie's parents for not helping the Petitos find their girl. Now, you can be angry about that because it's like, puppies are cute, murder is bad. You don't have to, you can be angry about those things and happy about those things and still be a human journalist, right? So it's a little different as a reporter than it is as a host of a show about a specific topic that's not just delivering newscast style material. But back then on the Anthony trial, it was really just a correspondent and delivering the, you know, the process that was playing out in the courtroom.
So you touched on something interesting there, to where now being at News Nation, and you were at CNN/HLN for a while. Okay, so there was 2016, which was, you know, I don't want to say it was an apocalypse, but it kind of, in terms of the media sense, it kind of was. And then 2020 was apocalypse times 85, to say the least. So going from, you weren't at CNN in 2020, of course, but being there for 2016, seeing what played out in 2020, and now being in a network that prides itself on really being down the middle. I think this is a good talking point I want to hit on before we get to the concluding segment, in the importance of being, I don't want to say ethical, because it's not unethical to have an opinion, but being straightforward and fair to both sides. Yeah. I mean, I mentioned Miller before. Miller said to me, you know, when he used to work at Fox 5, when he would walk into the newsroom, there's two sides to every story was a sign that hung above the door. Which one did you get? And conveniently, the sign had two sides. So, and on the matter of fairness, in an era where we have one network that leans this way, one network that leans that way, where do you see the future of cable news, and how can News Nation change the game?
So I wanted to come to this network because of this mission. I'm sort of, as a viewer, kind of appalled at the process I have to go through in order to just catch up on the news, by turning on a cable channel. I actually do have to switch around, and I find that frustrating. I would like to have my favorite people and my favorite shows, and just like I always did, and be able to feel like I am, healthily informed of what's happened. But this bifurcation of, philosophy has now caused me to be frustrated as a viewer. And so News Nation has a mission to take that frustration off of you and say, look, nobody's unbiased. You can never not be biased, but what you can do is present both biases, right? And I think that's the mission, is that we at least give you both issues to chew on. It's funny, in criminal justice, a lot of times you talk about a defendant. He raped and murdered that child. Well, the answer to that would be, well, hang him up, string him up. He raped and murdered a child. There's nothing you can tell me that will change my opinion from string him up, get rid of him, death penalty all the way. He's the worst of the worst. And then if you include his backstory, that as a child, he was beaten daily, tied to a bedpost for 3 weeks until he almost died. He was starved. His head actually has concussive places where his stepfather beat him regularly. His head was forced between the door of the bedroom and the wall and regularly hammered. And he physically has brain injuries that you can see his brain activity. You can see how he is a completely damaged human. You might feel differently. You might. I'm not saying you will. You might. It changes everything. And even the Supreme Court has determined we don't execute the mentally ill anymore. That's just not what we do as a society. We look at them as though they are not, culpable for their actions because they don't have their faculties. So you will change your opinion if you know more. And that's what we aim to do as a news network. Give you the backstory, give you the context, give you each element that might inform your decision making. And then you go ahead and make any decision you like. I'm not going to lecture you about what you should feel. I'm not going to give you a lower third that screams, this is a lie, or, you'll be able to determine it for yourself based on what informs you,
Absolutely. And I mentioned being a wrestling fan when I was a kid earlier, like when the Chris Benoit tragedy happened and I heard what had happened, I was like, okay, well, he's a scumbag. But then I learned, well, he took how many chair shots did he take to his head? Then they examined his brain. He had the brain of an 85-year-old dementia patient. And I'm like, okay, well, that might explain it. So it gave me a little bit of a different avenue because we're so quick to judge because you talk about the inhibition to being self-reflective, to being introspective, because we're afraid to look at our own works. But so oftentimes, I think if we have something, anything, I'm not just talking about news, anything that can challenge that viewpoint, we have to explore it because otherwise we don't grow as people.
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head. When you know more, it mitigates your gut reaction or your knee-jerk impulse. And I think right now, America is suffering from a lot of knee-jerk impulse reaction, and they have a venue to broadcast it because every person out there is now a broadcaster or a publisher. And that's not necessarily the most healthy way to exercise your First Amendment. Screaming epithets at your neighbor is certainly free, but it isn't healthy. It doesn't help. It doesn't fix anything. It just causes more problems. And we as a nation would be, we would be wise to be more introspective and try to self-educate a little more rather than sit in your silo and listen to your echo chamber reflect why you're right, And that, unfortunately, I think that's what news has become. It's become a silo where you can dance around with like-minded people who convince you that you're not wrong. And you may not be wrong, but you certainly could mitigate the way you ply your trade in communicating what you think and what you feel.
To borrow words from a musician by the name of Eric Clapton, before you accuse me, take a look at yourself. There you go.
Amen. Amen. Yeah.
So this has been a podcast. I have loved every minute of this conversation. I hope you've had just as much fun as I have. I always conclude, thank you, with the segment of this podcast called Rapid Fire, 5 hit and run questions for me, 5 answers for me. Are you ready?
Wait, before you do that, because you have to end that way, but I need you to know something. Just this week, I launched an initiative. It's called Rising Tide, the value in mentoring others. And when your request came to me to do this podcast, I don't have a spare hour in the day, and I wouldn't have done it. But I saw who you were, saw that you were this young kid who's really working hard and wants to better himself and wants to do well in the business and wants the trade to be better. And I looked at you almost like this is a mentoring thing, like, yeah, I'm doing this for this kid because he's got what it takes. He's got the passion, he's got the drive, he's got the research. I watched your podcasts, and I thought, yeah, this guy, he deserves my time. And so it reflects why I started this initiative. I've collected all the best of the best in broadcasting to once a month do a Zoom session with people like you who are coming into the business and want to hear the secrets of how these people got so good at what they do and the folly of what they wish they'd done differently. So I just want you to know that you made an impression on me. And I felt this was a really valuable thing to do with you.
Thank you so much. I do not know how to top that.
Join my symposiums. I would love it if you would.
All right, there you go. There you go. So I will continue a rapid fire because I don't know how else to end the show. But that, again, I've peaked. I can exit stage left now. But no, first, funniest story you've ever covered.
Funniest story I've ever covered. Oh, I should have known this was coming too. Isn't that weird? All I can think of is the bad stuff.
That's okay. If you got to say pass, you can say pass. We're not strict.
I'll give you a twist on it.
Mm-hmm.
A guy named Mr. Black. Mr. Black did a list every year called the Best Dressed List, and we all looked forward to it. Mr. Black is no longer with us, but he used to do Mr. Black's Best Dressed List, and I think it was around the end of the year. And I had an interview with him in Dallas on the morning show, and I was so excited to do Mr. Black's Best Dressed with him. So I did this, I dressed in commercial break. I threw this ridiculous sweater on and an awful feather boa, and he came up and sat, and we were obviously going to open up what do you think of my outfit? It backfired. Oh my God. He came out of the gate talking about this horrible childhood he had, and I was sitting there wearing this ridiculous outfit. We're going to go to break. Looking back, it was funny. At the time, it was horribly mortifying, and it was about the worst television moment ever.
There you go. It's got some humor to it. So it's a tinge of gallows, but nonetheless, it is humor.
It was gallows humor, yes.
For sure. So second, I mentioned you mentioned the Yasser Arafat interview you've done. That was good, but that was good for different reasons. Favorite interview you've done?
That one only because it was so remarkable. Beyond the information that we discussed, there were weird things. We weren't going to do the interview till 4:00 in the morning. What? I had to scramble over the rubble with Israeli tanks, missiles at us. That was frightening. M60s, that was scary to go on the other side of the weapons, knowing that they'd been firing on the compound. And then I had to sit for a meal with him, with a big long table of people at 3:00 in the morning. I had to have this meal with him, and he sat beside me, and he kept putting things on my plate, like eggs. He would pick them up with his fingers, and he'd put hard-boiled eggs on my plate, wanting me to eat them. And I actually had a tinge of the flu at the time too, which was so all the weirdness of that interview, coupled with the remarkableness of the opportunity, without question makes that my favorite interview of all time.
Yeah, makes sense. Third, best advice anyone ever gave you?
Listen. Or listening. Yeah. And then follow that by read. So yeah, that without question, very simple.
Sounds good. Fourth, you are out in Darien, Connecticut, not too far from where I am in New Haven, of course. So just a little train ride away. But you've also spent a lot of time working in New York City, of course, giving your time at NBC and other outlets, as we've discussed. So favorite bar or restaurant in both Darien and New York City?
Darien, no question, Coromandel. It is the finest Indian cuisine I've ever eaten, including in India. We get it about 2 times a week. I mean, it's crazy. I blame Coromandel for 10 extra pounds. So without question, Coromandel. And then in New York City, my favorite restaurant is no longer there. And I have been researching, trying to find out where the chefs, and it might pop up again. It was called Saigon Grill. And it was Vietnamese food on the Upper West Side, but they had some other outlets. They had about 80 guys on bikes that used to deliver all over the Upper West Side. I mean, they did a booming business. It was the best food ever. And if you called them, you could have food at your door within about 10 minutes. It was nuts. And I probably had Saigon Grill, not a word of a lie, 3 to 4 times a week. And it remains one of my favorite restaurants in the world. And I just wish I could find where they were and where I could replicate that menu and still get some of that food.
Let me know if they pop up. I might have to try when I'm down in the city, if they're back in the city at some point. So fifth and finally, I apologize because I know, the third question is kind of similar to the last one I'm going to ask you. I know you discussed listening and reading, but besides that, let's say someone's looking to enter this profession, or let's say you're just talking to a younger version of yourself. Besides listening and reading, what would you tell somebody in that position?
Well, I would tell them to listen and read again, because I can't stress. But then I would also add, accommodate for all ideas, because early in your career, you think you know better. And you discount other people around the table. Oh, that's just silly. Oh, well, why would we do that? And if you accommodate for them more, you actually find better angles on stories and you learn more and your coverage is better. And I think if I'd done that earlier, I think I'd have been a better journalist. I do that a lot now. I value the youngest 2 people on my staff. The things that they bring to the table are just like, wow, really eye-opening, and they reflect a demographic that we need to broadcast to. And I think that with diversity as well, right? Like for too often as a woman, it was like, oh, that's adorable. Anyway, does anyone have a better idea? And it's whether you're a woman, whether you're Black, whether you're Asian, whether you're gay, whether you're trans, I think that's been the experience for a lot of us around the boardroom table. And so listening to people of all of those ilks gives you a better tapestry of how to tell a story. First of all, how to learn about the story, and then how to tell the story to the entire demographic that you're trying to, all demographics that you're trying to attract. So that would be the advice to my younger self. Do that sooner.
That concludes what's been really, really a fun interview that I've been very fortunate to have with Ashleigh Banfield. But before we go, if there's any plugs or shout outs you want to give, your social media, anybody in specific, fire away.
Well, I always love people coming to, Ashleigh Banfield on Instagram, TV Ashleigh on Twitter, Ashleigh Banfield on Facebook. And I really would love people to come to the symposium that I'm going to hold once a month. I've got like a who's who of people who have agreed to sign on to be mentors. It's going to be a half-hour symposium once a month. Let me give you a quick one. Mika Brzezinski, Lisa Ling, Bob Costa, Savannah Guthrie, Deborah Norville, Megan McCain, Dan Abrams, Tom Roberts, Shepard Smith, like huge name. That's only a quarter of the names. They're all going to join me and answer all of your questions and give you the advice that you're looking for. And Gail King, she just joined too, which was, I'm like, yay, I'm in Michael's league. So I want all your listeners and followers and watchers to feel free. It's free. It's a free symposium. You can only benefit from the words of the wisdom, and the wisdom of the titans in the industry.
Thank you for that. On my end, of course, social media, Mike in New Haven is my Twitter. Mike original_MC1, I should say, is my Instagram handle. LinkedIn, Mike Colón, then type in MIC_D for the first word of the podcast, because there's a lot of Mike Colóns out there. So if you're listening for the first time, because Ashleigh, you can find me on those fronts. MC's Audio, MC_S Audio YouTube channel, and just subscribe and leave a 5-star rate and review everywhere else that you get the podcast on. Apple, Spotify, we're everywhere that you can search us up. So coming up on the Mike in New Haven podcast, 2 different shows, but 2 fascinating shows. Tuesday, we'll continue with the news theme. Ali Bauman, who's a good friend of mine from Channel 2 in New York City, WCBS, a great reporter. She'll be joining me for that show. And then next Friday, volume 6 of the miniseries, The E-Men, inside the NYPD's emergency service unit, with retired NYPD Inspector Ron Wasson. He ran the entire unit for a while, including on September 11, 2001, when 14 emergency service unit officers would perish. So we'll discuss that and his entire career at the NYPD at length. In the meantime, on behalf of Ashleigh Banfield, I'm Mike Colón. We will see you next time. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend and stay safe.